Today's video lecture is going to discuss human chromosomes. We're going to talk about what is karyotyping and what is a karyotype. We're going to discuss genetic disorders within humans. What are some genetic advantages that sometimes disorders present themselves as? And then chromosomal disorders and what the term non-disjunction means. Okay. So the first one is karyotyping. Karyotyping is actually where scientists will actually take a picture of human chromosomes. They'll take all those chromosomes, they'll match them up, and they'll put them in order from longest to shortest, and then they number them. Okay. For the most part, they're all longest to shortest, sets 1 through 22, but we put our sex chromosomes as our last two chromosomes. So those are chromosomes 23. You should have 2 of each. Okay, 2 chromosome number 1s, you got 1 from mom and 1 from dad. Same thing with chromosome number 2, 3, 4, and all the way down the line. So, our sex chromosomes are the ones that determine our gender. Males are XY and females are XX. This helps us to determine whether or not we're male or female. We all have an X chromosome that carries a lot of genes on them. Females have a second X chromosome, and males have a Y chromosome that's a lot shorter and carries a lot of the genes that control the hormones within a male. So, to notice that you have XY or XX, you would have either 2 long sex chromosomes or a long and a short sex chromosome. The X is a lot longer. It carries about 1,200 genes on it, whereas the Y chromosome only carries about 140 genes on it, specific to the male species. And again, it's referred to as the 23rd chromosome. The first 22 chromosomes are what are called autosomes. These are your body, other ones that are for male or female, and they take and control everything else within your body. You should have 22 sets of 2 chromosomes, so 44 total autosomes, and 2 total sex chromosomes. So a normal human being would have 46 chromosomes, and when we reference people as to their chromosomes, a normal male would be referenced as 46XY, and a normal female would be referenced as 46XX. 46 total chromosomes, and then whatever the sex chromosomes are to notice what the reference is. Chromosomes can cause genetic disorders within our bodies. For instance, these are all disorders that are caused by specific genes. First one being sickle cell disease. Sickle cell disease is caused by an effective gene in hemoglobin, so within our red blood cells. It causes the red blood cells, instead of it be the puffy circular shape like it should be, instead it's shaped like a C. It's very constricted in. They can become very stuck together, and this prevents the body from carrying a lot of the oxygen that it needs. So we have decreased oxygen levels in the body of people who have sickle cell disease. And this is caused by a mutation within a gene, so a gene mutation. Okay? Cystic fibrosis is also caused by a gene mutation. It's a deletion of 3 bases or 1 amino acid within a gene within our body. That 1 amino acid has a lot of an effect within the body of somebody with CF, which is cystic fibrosis. Because of that 1 amino acid deletion, the cell membrane cannot transport the chlorine ions within the body that it needs to across the cell membrane. 2 copies of this allele are needed, which means it is a recessive trait. Okay? Both sickle cell disease and cystic fibrosis are recessive traits. You need to have 2 alleles to have these diseases. What that means is that you can be a carrier and you can pass it on to your children without knowing that you have that gene within your body. And CF causes digestive problems and thick mucus within the lungs. Okay, so sickle cell disease, cystic fibrosis. Another gene mutation is Huntington's disease. But Huntington's disease is caused by a dominant allele. So you only need one gene that shows that dominant allele to have Huntington's disease. Huntington's disease is a repeat of 3 bases. Those 3 bases being CAG, which code for glutamine, and they repeat over and over and over and over again. This is in a gene that helps control your brain cells, protein within your brain cells. So one of the major problems with Huntington's disease is that it causes mental deterioration over time, and it also causes uncontrolled movements within the body. Okay? This usually doesn't appear until middle age, but the age can vary, and that's based on how long the chain of repeats is. How long is it? If it's longer, then it appears earlier in life, and if it's a shorter set of repeats, then it appears later in life. Okay? So these are all gene mutations. Now, there are some advantages to some gene mutations and a reason why some of these genes have survived within the population. For instance, sickle cell disease. Sickle cell disease originated in Africa and India and those regions of the world. These regions of the world also carry high instances of malaria. It has been found that people with sickle cell disease are actually resistant to the malaria virus. So because of that, sickle cell has actually provided them with an advantage to living in that area. And so they don't contract malaria, and they're able to survive longer, even though they have some issues. For instance, they can't exactly, their bodies can't carry as much oxygen as they need, but they don't get the malaria, and they learn to live with the lower levels of oxygen. So there are some advantages that don't seem like advantages initially. Now, not only do we have gene disorders or genetic disorders, we also have chromosomal disorders. And chromosomal disorders come from a term called non-disjunction. So if we break that up into our prefixes and suffixes in our words, the term junction means to come together, and the term dis means the opposite of. So disjunction would mean to pull apart. Okay, the opposite of coming together is to pull apart. But non-disjunction, non meaning not, so not pulling apart. When we go through meiosis, reference meiosis if you need to again, but when we go through meiosis, all of our chromosomes are supposed to split so that we have half of a set of chromosomes in every single reproductive cell or gamete that we produce. Unfortunately, if non-disjunction happens, and say these 2 chromosomes don't separate like they're supposed to, we end up with 3 on one side and 1 on the other. So you have 2 gametes that have 3 chromosomes in them and 2 that have 1. Now, if we have 1 less chromosome than we're supposed to of a specific chromosome, it's called monosomy. Okay? Monosomy, the prefix mono, meaning 1. So we have 1 copy of the chromosome that we're supposed to have 2 of. Trisomy means we have 3 copies of it. Okay? 3 copies of the chromosome we're supposed to have. And this is after fertilization. Okay? So after fertilization, the babies can be trisomy or monosomy, depending on which one of these were used to fertilize. Okay? Now, if that happens, we have multiple disorders that can happen. First one being, let's talk trisomy 13. Trisomy 13 is a disorder called Pateau syndrome. And Pateau syndrome is when somebody is born with a cleft lip. They have clenched hands a lot of times, They have severe mental retardation along with seizures. Now, some of these symptoms appear, sometimes they don't. It all depends on the severity of the trisomy. So more is not always better, okay? Now remember back in the first slide here, we talked about the fact that a normal male would be 46XY and a normal female would be 46XX. Well, if you have an extra chromosome, you're not going to have 46 chromosomes. Instead, you're going to have 47 chromosomes. So a female with Pateau would be 47XX, and a male would be 47XY. That's going to be the same for the next two also. Trisomy 18 is called Edwards syndrome. And Edwards syndrome usually presents in females, but it can present in males also. You get clenched hands. You actually are born with rounded bottom feet, so instead of having the arch, it's actually the opposite, and you get the round on the bottom, okay? A low birth weight, and many of those females have a mental delay. The last trisomy that we're going to talk about is trisomy 21, which is Down syndrome. Down syndrome can be anywhere along the spectrum from mild to very severe. Down syndrome babies are usually born with decreased muscle tone. They have a flattened nose shape. They have separated joints, especially within their head structure. So they have very fragile head areas. They are slow learning. They have impulsive behavior. And very much of the time they remain childlike throughout their years. This is why a lot of times you see people with Down syndrome who are older, okay, 30s, 40s, they're adults, but they appear very childlike. They're very innocent, okay? Down syndrome people have that very childlike presence of them all the time. The last two we're going to talk about are actually issues within the sex chromosomes, so non-disjunction of the sex chromosomes. The first one is called Klinefelter's disease. And Klinefelter's is when you have 46XXY. So it would be trisomy 23 or trisomy with the X. And you would end up with, it would be shown as 47XXY. So it's a male who has an extra X chromosome. This renders the male infertile, so he's not able to have offspring. But every other aspect, usually there are very few, if any, other detectable symptoms. And so many times people go through life not knowing they have Klinefelter's disease or Klinefelter syndrome, and then all of a sudden they want to have a family and they're not able to have the family, they don't know what's going on, and then they finally discover that they have this Klinefelter syndrome. The next one is Turner syndrome. Now this would be a female. It's 45X, so she's missing an X chromosome. Okay? This would be a female. She would be infertile. She would not be able to have babies. And sometimes there are some other issues with that because you do need a second X chromosome for some of the production of other things within your body. So genetic disorders can have advantages, they can have disadvantages, and these chromosomal non-disjunctions, more is not always better. Trisomy, whenever you have 3 chromosomes instead of 2, can be very harmful to the body, and you wouldn't be a quote-unquote normal person.